Hello internet, and today is going to be another book opinion, those videos in which I tell you my opinion on a book, and today's book is going to be the final book in a series, in a trilogy, and that is Dreams of Gods and Monsters by Laini Taylor. Now, as I've mentioned before, I have a love-hate relationship with this series as a whole. I love it. I love Laini Taylor's writing. I really love the flowery sort of poetic way that she wrote. I tend not to gravitate towards that style of writing. However, the way that she wrote, it just encaptured me. I loved how it sounded. I loved how the audiobook sounded. Everything just worked in the way that she used words to tell her story, right? However, I wasn't too happy with the story itself, with the plot. So in the first book, I thought that was the best book because it really had this air of hopefulness. Like, you knew bad things were going to happen, but you still had some hope, and that was the main message of the book, at least when you listen to Brimstone, right? That's why Karoo is named Karoo. Now, in the second book, I got too tired of the angst between Akiva and Karoo and their whole relationship. I didn't like the Marigold past thing because I didn't feel like her past as a chimera really affected how she acted when she has all these memories of being a warrior and being in this sort of environment, yet she doesn't act as if those memories have any effect or change in her Karoo-ness, right? She was just Karoo, but she happened to have an archive of memories. It really confused me. I didn't understand how that can happen, and I've seen it a lot in books, so I can't blame Laini Taylor for that, but simply I've never understood why authors choose to add in a lot of memories to a person, yet those memories don't affect that person's actions, if that makes any sense. And I was really frustrated with the sort of angst and the fact that Laini Taylor has this habit of trying to end every chapter on a cliffhanger, and yet every other chapter we follow different characters, so we're following like different little stories that all make one plot, and every different chapter ends on a little cliffhanger with a dun dun dun, and you're like all excited and trying to figure out what's happening, but then when you get to the next chapter, it's not a continuation. You're going back to another half of the story, and that's gonna end on a cliffhanger, and you're just getting your emotions all high because you're like, somebody's gonna die, something horrible is gonna happen, yet you end up falling off of the edge of that cliffhanger because turns out the next chapter is actually really good. Then that ends on a cliffhanger that you care about more, and then when you get back to the previous cliffhanger, it turns out this horrible thing that you've been thinking could happen for the last chapter and a half in the back of your mind never actually happens. And there's one or two points where the cliffhangers aren't disappointing with the outcome, and it's actually worth the wait, and you're like, yes, that is awesome, or oh my gosh, I'm so devastated. But a lot of the times the cliffhangers just fall flat, and it's just a constant riling you up, making you think, oh no, something horrible is gonna happen, and it just gives you this constant air of hopelessness where you no longer hope that anything great's gonna happen. And through the second book and then through the beginning of the third, I started to realize this is just how Laini Taylor chose to write the book, giving the reader a false sense of hope, or a false sense of hopelessness, where the reader is supposed to think something horrible is gonna happen, but every single time it all turns out good for the main characters. Like, it's not perfect or anything, but they're not dead, and they're not like horribly maimed forever, and they usually live, and all the ships work out the way that you want them to, and yada yada yada. So it turns out it's never really as bad as you thought it would be. So Dreams of Gods and Monsters was a disappointment to me because I just had come to a point after sitting through that constantly happening in the second book to just being like, just get done with the story because I know every single cliffhanger is gonna be fine and happy and nothing horrible is really gonna happen. And I hated getting like all my heart beating and worrying about these characters only for it to turn out they were perfectly okay. And yeah, that's a little weird and morbid, but I like when characters die. I like when horrible stuff happens in my book, especially if you're telling me a story where it's a century-old war between two factions of creatures that hate and despise each other. I'm expecting some casualties. I'm expecting some meaningful casualties of people that I care about and that I love and that I've come to care about. I don't want like a bunch of senseless deaths or anything, but I've come to appreciate having characters suffer, and some characters be killed off for the sake of the progression of a story and making it feel like more heartfelt. So it was really disappointing that nothing really terrible happens to any of these characters and have any long lasting effects. Like, one bad thing will happen, but the next second everything's perfectly okay and fine. I think the most interesting part about this book was the concept of the angels and the Cephalin, and we really learning more about what happened all those years ago, how they came to be in the world of the Chimera, and all that sort of stuff, and learning about the Black Angel. I really liked her. I like Eliza, I think her name is. I really liked her character. I really liked the progression of that story. It was something that I was waiting to see because in the first book it was mentioned, and I think I mentioned it before, but in the first book review and reverse book opinion, when I read that first book, I was like, you guys need to stay and get this information. It's going to be relevant. And lo and behold, it comes back in this book. So I really liked that story arc, and I found that interesting. The war was getting a little tiring. The fact that I knew nothing really bad was going to happen to my main character was getting tiring. I was getting tired of the extreme angst between Akiva and Karoo. I was done with it. Just make out and leave me alone already. I'm tired of hearing about your relationship. It's pretty dumb. I think my favorite relationship was with Karoo's friend and the little violin player. I thought they were really cute. They were a really great couple. But otherwise, I was just tired of the angst from everyone else. The only other thing that I thought was a little odd came with the angel part, and that's really weird, but I feel like that was just shoved in this last book because it felt like the author may have forgotten it or they were building up to it, but she didn't really know how to work it in. And this, I'm talking about the idea of Scarab and then the prophecies and all of that sort of stuff. Towards the end, we meet a queen who is a queen of a special type of Cephalin, the same type that Akiva ends up being part of with the tiger eyes. So the tiger eye angels, and it turns out that they have to do a special thing to block off some greater evil and this and that. And I felt like it was just kind of rushed there at the end. Like, that was just a little forced in. There was really no build up. There was a build up of us learning about the history of the angels and how they came to be. But that last part just kind of felt like it was rushed too much, especially when it was sort of introduced in the first book and there was no progression until, oh, remember that thing we mentioned that there was a darker history in the first book? Here's that darker history. Oh, here's something that happens. And it just felt, the ending felt a lot rushed and a lot like, oh, I just want to wrap this up really nice and put a bow tie on it, and oh, like, not everything's perfect, but it's all perfect, you know, that sort of ending. And I really didn't appreciate it. I really would have liked to see more of Liza, the angel that we start to learn all these stuff, the stuff from the Black Angel and Scarab. I'd like to learn more about them because they seem like they had some sort of relationship, like some fated or destined relationship, and I would have liked to see more of these characters, especially Scarab, because she really freaked me out. Like, she came across for me as a Tom Riddle type character, and by this I mean that character who's really powerful and really menacing and has a lot of potential to do a lot of great things, and they need someone to shape their path for them, otherwise they're going to turn out completely evil. And Scarab definitely had a menacing quality to her, where she was this little kid, and she's like, oh, I was a little kid and I thought of ripping out people's hearts for heartstrings to make a super destructive weapon, and I'll be the thing that monsters are scared of. And like, when she says monsters, she's not talking about like Chimera, she's talking about like pure evil, and she wants to be the nightmare of pure evil. Like, she was a really interesting character, and she was like really weird and menacing, and it wasn't a character that like I would want to go to sleep next to. Like, she was really like menacing, and I would have liked to see more development there, more development with the whole prophecy thing, and not such an abrupt end where it felt like, oh, I'm just hiding everything up so that we can end the story. Overall, I think it was a pretty okay conclusion to the whole the Chimera Angel arc thing that was going on and that was started from Daughter and Smoke and Bone. I was really disappointed though about how the messages that Brimstone shared were always like left in the back, that Carew never brought them up, that they were never a very big pinnacle point, because I think a lot of the messages he said really did have a lot to do with the structure of the book, about how hope is the only true magic, how pain is magic in their world, and how you can't rely on pain to get you everywhere, but you have to hope for more, and that is the start of something greater, right? And I felt like there was not enough appreciation for Brimstone, and I would have loved to see more of him. And like, now that we're in the third book, I guess it's not really a spoiler, but I feel like Brimstone's death was the only death that made worthwhile, and he's the only death that I kind of wish didn't happen, simply because the way no one ever remembers what he says, okay? So I kind of wish he stayed around so that he could tell them, because they can't remember what he says unless it's a fond memory, and then they automatically forget to think about the meaning of what he says. However, it was the only meaningful death that happened, so I'm happy that at least one happened in the course of 3 really long books. But at the same time, you know, I wanted to see more people who I cared about died, and there was a few places where I was like, oh, she's gonna do it, but it turns out she didn't. And yeah, was I happy and relieved that my favorite characters lived, but I was also really disappointed in Laini Taylor for not going that step and like just making me weep and actually cry, and not just pulling me to a cliffhanger, make me think something horrible is gonna happen, and then it all turns out peachy keen in the end. I just felt the angst buildup was just too much at the end. There wasn't enough high stakes that actually had any consequences. A lot of plot points seemed a little rushed in places where I would have loved to see those things extended versus some of the other things that was chosen to be extended. And I really think the overall characters really didn't grasp a message that I thought was very important and was kind of the framework for the story. So I was overall kind of disappointed with this end. And I feel really bad for it because I really did want to like this. I think this book kind of comes across as like a modern tragedy where everything horrible is going to happen. However, while I still will refer to it as that, a book that's just going to get you up and like fill you with the drama, right, of a Shakespearean tragedy, it doesn't have that beautiful death in the end. One thing that everybody makes fun of Shakespeare for is killing off every character, but one thing that we need to realize is sometimes killing off every character is what you need to make it a good story. And I think this would have been a much better story if there was actually some stakes and consequences that the reader was going to have to get used to, that these characters might not make it out at the end of the day, and some definitely won't make it out at the end of the day. So overall, that's like all my thoughts and feelings of Dreams of Gods and Monsters. I thought it was an okay book. There was a lot of things that brought it down for me, but overall, I still really like the book in spite of those things. But I would warn anyone who is against angst, who really doesn't like cliffhangery sort of chapter end to end, who prefers that high stakes have consequences, don't pick this up. You might end up frustrated. But if you're the type of reader who just wants all your characters to live and have happy endings at the end, then read this book, because although they'll put you through some tense moments, you know your characters are going to come out safe. So if that's something you prefer, then I would say give this trilogy a shot. And that is it. So comment down below how you feel about this book, or how you feel about the series as a whole. Did the ending disappoint you? Did it feel rushed? Did you end up coming to dislike it or love it based on how the series progressed? If you like what you're seeing here and you want to continue seeing more, click all those bunnies down below, and goodbye, internet.